Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to explore a shape that is so common, we honestly kind of take its mathematical perfection for granted. I'm talking, of course, about the circle. We're going to trace humanity's understanding of this shape, going all the way from the organic, beautiful symmetry we see in nature, straight through to the precise, elegant rules that actually govern it. It's a fascinating journey, so let's get right into it.
I want you to just take a second and let this chapter title from our source text sink in. I'm up and down and round and round. It has this wonderful, almost poetic rhythm to it, doesn't it? It really invites us to slow down and just be observant. Think about your daily life for a minute. Think about the wheels on your car, the mug you drink your morning coffee out of, the coins jingling in your pocket. Humanity has literally always been fascinated by the shapes around us. And the circle? Well, it's held a particularly special place in our history and our art. But where did that fascination actually kick off?
Well, it started right out there in the natural world. Just look at these breathtaking examples from nature. You've got the mesmerizing expanding ripples that happen when a single raindrop hits still water. You've got the concentric rings mapping out the entire lifespan of a tree, or the intricate spiraling patterns of a sunflower. And of course, the awe-inspiring glow of a full moon in the night sky. These aren't just pretty things to look at. These are tangible, real-world examples of natural symmetry. When our ancient ancestors painted the sun as a circle on a cave wall, they were actually taking their very first steps toward formalizing the geometry that we use today.
Okay, let's dive into this, because right here is where the leap from just looking at things to doing hard mathematics actually happens. When those early humans looked up at the moon and then looked down at a ripple in a puddle, they probably asked themselves a pretty huge fundamental question. What exactly do all these circles have in common, regardless of how big or small they are? Like, how do we describe the shape so perfectly that the exact same rules apply whether we're talking about a microscopic cell or the massive orbit of a planet? Well, to answer that, we have to turn those natural observations into strict mathematical definitions.
And here is the master key that unlocks the whole shebang. A circle is formally defined as the locus, or set, of all points on a two-dimensional plane that are equidistant from a given point on that same plane. I absolutely love the word locus here. It basically just means a set of points that all follow one very specific rule. It's the ultimate constraint. Imagine plotting millions and millions of tiny dots and telling every single one of them they have to sit the exact same distance away from one specific spot. When you do that, those dots merge to form this flawless continuous boundary.
Now, building outward from that definition, we've got to talk about that specific spot I just mentioned. This is the center. The center is the absolute anchor of the entire shape. It's the single, given point from which literally everything else originates and is measured. Without the center, the circle doesn't even exist. It has no reference point. Every single dot sitting on that outer edge owes its exact placement entirely to its relationship with this one crucial anchor point. So how do we actually measure that relationship? We use the radius. You can think of the radius as this invisible, totally rigid tether. It's the one parameter that dictates the circle's entire scale. It connects that center anchor to any given point out there on the edge. And the beautiful thing is, it absolutely does not matter which point on the edge you pick, that tether is always exactly the same length. If that tether stretches or shrinks by even a fraction of a millimeter, boom, the geometric perfection completely collapses. It's that strict equality of the radius that creates the smooth curve.
All right, let's bring a new geometric character into the mix, the chord. If the radius is a tether from the center to the outside, a chord is more like an internal bridge that connects any two distinct points across the circle itself. You pick point A somewhere on the edge, you pick point B somewhere else on the edge, and you just draw a straight line right between them. Bam, that's a chord. Now, some of these chords are going to be really short, just kind of grazing the outer edges, while others are going to be super long, cutting deep across the middle of the shape. Which brings us to a really fun, kind of playful juxtaposition. What's the actual difference between a chord and a diameter? Well, honestly, a diameter isn't some totally different, unique entity. A diameter is really just a chord with a VIP pass. It is the absolute longest possible chord you can draw inside that circle. And the only way it achieves that maximum length is by crashing right through that anchor point we talked about earlier, the center. So keep this in mind. Every diameter is a chord, but definitely not every chord is a diameter.
And this perfectly highlights one of the circle's most elegant properties. Let's try a quick physical thought experiment straight from our source text. Imagine you draw a perfect circle on a piece of paper and you cut it out. Now, fold that paper right in half so the curved edges overlap perfectly. When you open it back up, what do you see? You see a straight crease running right down the middle, passing exactly through the center. You just made a diameter.
But more importantly, you just physically proved that every single diameter acts as a perfect line of reflection symmetry. The left side is a flawless mirror image of the right.
So we can actually take this circle's perfect balance and split it into two main types of symmetry. First up, we have the reflection symmetry we just discovered with our paper folding experiment. And remember, since you can fold that paper across the center from any angle you want, a circle literally has infinitely many lines of reflection symmetry. Wild, right? Second, we have something called complete rotational symmetry, which is all about what happens when you spin the shape around its center point.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can truly grasp rotational symmetry using a super simple real-world thought experiment from our source, the wheel test. Imagine you're looking at a perfectly smooth wheel of a car touching the ground. You close your eyes for a second, someone rotates that wheel just a tiny bit, and you open your eyes again. Could you tell that the specific part of the tire that was touching the ground has moved? No way. It's impossible to tell. Thanks to complete rotational symmetry, a circle looks exactly the same no matter how many degrees you spin it around its center.
Our source text gives us this absolutely brilliant way to picture how this symmetry applies to those chords we talked about. Picture this. Imagine you are standing exactly at the center of a giant circle. You stretch both your arms out, pointing at two different spots on the circle's edge. The distance between your two hands, that's your chord. Now keep your arms totally frozen, and imagine the floor beneath you magically starts to rotate. As you spin, your arms are now pointing to totally new spots on the edge, creating a brand new chord. But because the circle is perfectly symmetrical, the distance between your hands hasn't changed at all. That means the new chord is the exact same length as the old one. And the angle of your arms, the angle at the center, hasn't changed either. It's a perfect match.
That magical rotating floor idea is just a perfect way to set up these incredibly cool properties of chords, which are all built completely on the logic of symmetry. First, as we literally just proved with our arms, equal chords create equal angles at the center. Using that same exact logic, two chords that are the same length will always sit at the exact same distance away from the center. And finally, there's this unavoidable rule. As the chord gets longer and longer, it is forced to move closer and closer to the center. Remember the diameter? It's the longest chord possible, and it sits smack dab on top of the center.
All right, section 1, circles through 2 points. Let's jump into our very first mathematical investigation.
Imagine a totally blank piece of paper. You take a pen and you draw two distinct dots. Let's just call them point A and point B. Here is the foundational question. How many circles can you draw that perfectly pass through both point A and point B? Seriously, take a second to guess. Is it 1, 2, a dozen? Try to form a picture in your mind of circles connecting these two dots before we reveal the mathematical truth.
Well, if you guessed infinite, you are absolutely correct. But the crucial point here is why this happens. By definition, a circle's center has to be exactly the same distance from every single point on its edge. So any circle passing through both A and B must have a center that is equidistant from A and B. In geometry, the collection of all points perfectly equidistant from two other points forms a straight line. We call that the perpendicular bisector of segment AB. And because that line goes on forever, there are infinite possible centers, which means infinite possible circles. It's kind of wild when you think about it.
Moving right along to sections 2 and 3, the three-point problem and proving the unique circle. Let's introduce a little complication. What happens when we add a third distinct point to our paper, point C? We already know infinite circles pass through A and B, but how many can pass through A, B, and C? Let's build an airtight logical proof here. Step 1, draw the perpendicular bisector of AB. Any center on this line gives us a circle through A and B, okay? Step 2, draw the perpendicular bisector for AC. Any center on this line gives us a circle through A and C. Now for step 3. Because A, B, and C are not in a straight line, these two bisector lines are going to cross. That single intersection point, let's call it O, is literally the only point on the entire page equidistant from all three dots. Intersecting lines meet at exactly one place, right? Therefore, there is exactly one absolutely unique circle that can pass through three non-collinear points. Boom, proof complete. Which brings us nicely to section 4, triangles and circumcircles. Let's look at those three non-collinear points, A, B, and C, from a slightly different angle. Think about it. If you connect three dots that aren't in a straight line, what do you get? A triangle. And we've just figured out how to mathematically guarantee that a perfect circle can be drawn entirely around it. In geometry, this surrounding circle gets a special name. It's called a circumcircle. It is the unique circle passing through all three vertices, the corners, of a triangle.
And that magic intersection point we just found? That's known as the circumcenter. Every single triangle in existence has exactly one circumcircle and one circumcenter, no exceptions.
Now, what's really interesting is how this center shifts depending on the actual shape of the triangle. For an acute angle triangle where all the angles are less than 90 degrees, the circumcenters sit safely tucked inside the triangle. But if you stretch that triangle out so it becomes obtuse angled, meaning it has one angle wider than 90 degrees, the circumcenter actually gets pushed completely outside the triangle. And what if it's a perfect right-angle triangle? The circumcenter lands exactly on the midpoint of the hypotenuse, the longest side. It's like a sliding scale of geometry.
Okay, Section 5, the 5-question challenge. You've learned the visual rules, you've seen the logical proofs. Now it is time to energize our brains and test your newfound knowledge with a rapid-fire practice session drawn straight from our source text. Let's see what's stuck.
Here is question 1. You've got a triangle, and two of its angles measure 70 degrees and 60 degrees. Will its circumcenter fall inside the triangle or outside? I'll give you a second. Remember your basics. A triangle's interior angles always add up to 180 degrees. So 70 plus 60 is 130, meaning that third angle has to be 50 degrees.
So the answer is inside. Since 70, 60, and 50 are all perfectly less than 90 degrees, this is an acute angle triangle. And as we just learned, the circumcenter for an acute triangle always rests right inside the shape.
All right, question 2. Think way back to the very beginning of our detective journey regarding the locus of 2 points. Out of all the infinite circles that can pass through points A and B, what is the least possible radius one of those circles could have? How small can we go?
The answer is exactly half the length of segment AB. Remember that perpendicular bisector? The absolute closest the center point can get to A and B is right on the line segment connecting them, the dead center midpoint. When the center is the midpoint, segment AB becomes the diameter, which gives us the smallest, tightest possible circle. Any other center point on the bisector moves further away, which inevitably stretches the radius out to be larger.
Moving on to question 3. This one's a bit of a trick question pulled straight from the Think and Reflect section of the text. Can a unique circle pass through 3 collinear points? Basically, 3 points drawn in a perfectly straight line.
Nope, the answer is no. And this brilliantly illustrates why that non-collinear condition we discussed earlier is absolutely critical. If points A, B, and C are on a straight line, their perpendicular bisectors are going to be completely parallel to each other. And parallel lines never intersect. Without an intersection, you can't find a single center point. No center point, no circle. It's literally impossible.
Okay, question 4. We have triangle ABC, and one of its angles measures exactly 100 degrees. Where does the circumcenter lie? Inside, outside, or on the line?
It is outside the triangle. Because 100 degrees is larger than 90, we're dealing with an obtuse angled triangle. That wide, obtuse angle effectively pushes the geometric center of the circumscribing circle all the way out past the boundaries of the triangle itself.
And finally, question 5. This is the ultimate specific edge case of our triangle placement rules. For a perfectly right-angled triangle, exactly where is the circumcenter located?
Right smack at the midpoint of the hypotenuse. A huge congratulations if you got that one, and really, if you got all of them. You have systematically mastered the foundational geometric properties of triangles, points, and circles.
But seriously, what about 4 points? If 3 points guarantee a unique circle, what does it actually take for a fourth, random point to naturally fall perfectly on that exact same curved boundary? This concept is called concyclicity, and it leads directly into the amazing study of cyclic quadrilaterals, where opposite angles mysteriously sum to 180 degrees. But honestly, that is a geometric mystery we will leave you to ponder for your next learning journey. Until then, keep visualizing the math around you.
Ground today, moving all the way from observing nature to locking down precise geometric proofs. We anchored ourselves at the center, drew our invisible radii tethers, built our chord bridges, and spun this perfectly symmetrical shape around. But before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a real geometric mystery taken straight from the end of chapter exercises in our text. Think about this. If you were to draw every single possible chord of one specific fixed length inside a circle, and then you placed a tiny dot perfectly in the middle of every single one of those chords, what shape would all those midpoints form when you step back and look at them together? I want you to use the rules of symmetry and distance we just talked about to picture the answer in your mind. Keep thinking about it, keep exploring, and thank you so much for hanging out with me on this geometric journey.